Thank you, Professor. My name is David Kosing, MP Pokot South, West Pokot County.
My name is Abdul Rahim Daoud, MP for North Imenti in Meru County.
Honorable Mishimboko, MP Likoni, Mombasa County.
Nelson Rapkwech, MP Belgut. To your left, Prof.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Caleb Amisi, MP Saboti.
Dido Raso, MP Saku.
Abdi Shurie, MP Balambala, Garissa County.
Mary Emase, MP Teso South.
Stephen Mule, MP Matungulu.
Naisula Lesuda, MP Samburu West.
Thank you, honorable members. We also have the secretarial services led by the clerk of the House. I'll invite Florence to introduce her team.
Florence Atenyo Abonyo, Director Committee Services, Directorate of Audit, Appropriations and other select committees. With me is Mr. Michael Karuru, Deputy Director, Directorate of Legal Services, and the team of officers seated behind him in the, forming the Secretariat.
Can the Secretariat administer the oath to the good professor? You have a choice between the Quran, the Bible, and affirmation depending on your faith.
I use the Bible, Mr. Chairman.
You raise it like that.
I, Njuguna Ndung'u, do hereby swear to testify on all matters in question and tell this committee the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Professor, you have been nominated by His Excellency the President as the CS for National Treasure and Planning. The nomination requires approval by the National Assembly before appointment, and these proceedings with you and your other colleagues that started yesterday is to engage in allowing members of the committee to interrogate you on matters touching on your integrity, your ability, your suitability in occupying the important office to which you have been nominated. We will hear you in 90 minutes. The questions that will be asked by members, we have agreed should be concise and precise. Your answers should be equally concise and precise. It is not adversarial. We want to get facts where necessary, your opinion where necessary, and in so doing, you speak through the chair. There should be no altercation between you and any member. Neither are members going to question you directly, they also question you through the chair, as the rules of the House require. We will, once we finish with the preliminaries, I'm sure you've been watching the proceedings from elsewhere, we'll give you 10 minutes or less to tell us who you are, your short journey through life. Then the exchange of questions and answers will follow. At the end, I'll also give you a few minutes, no more than 3, to recap your wishes and anything else you want to tell the committee. We'll go to the next issue of your documentation. I believe you have carried your documents, and this good lady from the Secretariat will pick if you have put them together we want to ask you, do you have the compliance with tax obligations to the state from KRA?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I sent that. I sent the originals to this.
Do you have the
committee.
clearance with the Higher Education Loans Board?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have clearance with Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have a certificate of good conduct from DCI?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Have you ever been charged in a court of law or convicted for any criminal offense?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Are you a dual citizen of Kenya and any other jurisdiction?
No, Mr. Chairman.
You carry only one passport?
I carry only one passport.
Very good. As a matter of interest for the committee and the country, what is your net worth?
I've registered my net worth as roughly about 950 million.
950 million. Kenya shillings or dollars?
Kenya shillings. Currently, I'm earning in dollars, but everything is translated in Kenya shillings. 950,000.
950
million.
Kenya shillings. What are your current and anticipated sources of income?
Currently, I'm salaried at the African Economic Research Consortium, but I think that my anticipated earnings would be gratuity coming once then it means that I'll have to leave my job. The second one, that is gratuity. The other one will be maturing in financial investments through different sources, diverse sources. Those are the anticipated incomes coming to me.
Okay. I'll now open the floor to honorable members to ask you questions. I'll start with the... Oh, sorry. I'm jumping the gun, Professor.
Thank you.
Tell us the journey of your life in under 10 minutes.
Thank you. That's what I was anticipating. I hope I will take 10 minutes or less. And let me say that I'm a Kenyan, and I come from Kandara constituency in Murang'a. Actually, in Murang'a, we actually talk about location. I come from location 3 in Murang'a. And I went to school in one of the primary schools, Keguya Primary School, and I finished in 1973, joined Form 1. I was admitted to Form 1. Those are the days that you needed to be admitted. So I went to another school, a newly aided school in Murang'a, in Gatuli location, Kiabugi Secondary School. That was in 1974 to 1977. I had a first-class division that allowed me to be admitted to Kagumo High School, perhaps the school of my dreams. That was in 1978. I finished Form 6 in 1979. And in 1980, I came to Nairobi. I came to Nairobi because that was the only university in Kenya then. That is when I joined the University of Nairobi, and I was admitted to study Bachelor of Arts. I had a dream to study economics, so I was in Bachelor of Arts. You have to do 3 courses, and in the second year, you start specializing on the basis of performance. So I became what we used to call then 311 economics, and so I ended up graduating in 1984. We are the group that was affected by 1982 coup, so it means that we took longer than the normal 3-year degree.
Lost 1 year.
We lost slightly more than 1 year, but it is 1 year in terms of corridor. Thank you, Chair. And in 1984, I graduated in Bachelor of Arts in majoring in economics. In the same year, I was admitted to actually pursue postgraduate economics, postgraduate degree in Masters in Economics, which I finished in 1986. From 1986, it was actually more of research work, and in 1987, I was employed at the University of Nairobi as a tutorial fellow. That's the lowest rank in terms of the teaching fraternity. is from, but the tutorial fellow, you are employed on contract on the basis that you are going to pursue higher education, that is a PhD. So I did that for 2 years, from 1987 to 1989, and I got a scholarship to study economics at PhD level at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, funded by Swedish International Development Association, that is SIDA, and that was on the contract that we should study economics within 4 years. Usually economics, PhD in economics takes about 5 years, 2 years of coursework and 3 years of research. But we had a covenant to finish in 4 years. Of course, it was difficult, but I managed to finish in 4 years and 3 months. So I came back to Kenya in 1993, towards the end of 1993, to start teaching again in 1994. I was promoted in 1995 to become a lecturer. In 1997, I was promoted to become a senior lecturer. And in 2001, I became perhaps the youngest professor ever. I became an associate professor in 2001. That is the journey in terms of my academia. I've continued to be a researcher, and all my areas of research has been quite macroeconomics. I've trained so many economists in Africa. But then, in 1999, let me take a small step back. I was recruited to go and help support the establishment of KIPRA. KIPRA is a national think tank. It's the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. And I was there for 2 years. I was responsible for developing the first Kenya macro model. And I did develop the Kenya macro model by 2001. It was hosted in the Treasury. After that, I continued with my international assignment. I was employed in 2002 by International Development Research Center of Canada. And again, I became the program specialist in East and Southern Africa. In 2003, I joined the African Economic Research Consortium, a network that actually builds capacity for economists in Africa and even graduate training. I became director of training. And it was there that I was recruited and appointed governor of the central bank in 2007. And I continued and served for 8 years. In fact, chairman, I became the first governor to serve 8 years since the law was established, 2 terms, since the law was established in 1982. So for me, it was a chance in terms of not only of research, but intellectual leadership, but also policy leadership. After that, after the tour of duty, I decided that I needed to take a break. I went to Oxford University for 1 year in terms of Bravatnik School of Government to talk more about public policy making. Then in there, I was also a senior advisor to several organizations, especially the United Nations Capital Development Fund and even Alliance of Better Than Cash Alliance. And again, in 2019, I was getting back and more and more back into research and more into intellectual work. I was headhunted for African Economic Research Consortium, and I became the executive director. We support public universities in Africa to mount quality degree programs in economics. We have trained economists for the Ministry of Finance for many years, for the last 11 years. We have supported students in this area for many years, but we also provide frontier research in various topical policy issues. Maybe I'll have a chance to talk about some of them. That's where I am, and let me also mention that in the central bank, I remember I worked on 2 very prominent areas. One of them is to reformulate the monetary policy framework for Kenya. I do believe that the framework that I found there, I actually described it as an obsolete framework. And the second thing is that I pushed and defended M-Pesa until the fights with the banks, until it was concluded, and everybody believed that it was a very, very innovative product. Today, the world knows Kenya because of M-Pesa, and all other products that have come in that improved the retail electronic payment system and platforms in banks is one of the examples. I stop there, Mr. Chairman, because the history can be long, but let me say I am that young boy who started in location 3 in Gasharage in Kandara, and I'm now sitting here. Thank you very much.
Sir, we'll now open the forum. We'll start with the Deputy Speaker.
Professor Ndung'u, I think I'll start by congratulating you for being nominated for the position of Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning. I'll ask you a question that many Kenyans are asking. As it stands, the cost of living has risen, and many Kenyans are facing economic hardship. Also, the cost of basic commodities has skyrocketed and is beyond the reach of many Kenyans. Also, our debt now constitutes 67% of our nominal GDP, which comes to about 8.8 trillion, and that our debt service is at 1 trillion. What are the fiscal interventions you shall adopt to bring down the cost of living? What will you do to ensure that the price of basic commodities become under control and within the reach of many Kenyans? And what will you do to ensure that the debt doesn't cripple our country? Thank you.
Professor, you don't have to answer that. Record we do in batches of 4. Once you have 4 questions, you answer, then we take another 4 for better time management. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Professor, you have indicated in your CV that you have served as central bank governor. I want to know how many banks collapsed under your watch as CBK governor. 2, at the time you were CBK governor, Professor, we have 2 sworn affidavits in our files, both deponents alleging that you were adversely mentioned in the sale of the Grand Regency Hotel, and you also face abuse of office charges involving irregular award of a 1.2 billion shilling security tender while serving as central bank governor in 2014. Maybe you could tell us from these affidavits the status of those 2 issues, and in your mind, in view of the provisions of Article 6 of our Constitution on issues to do with integrity, and bearing in mind that if you are approved, you take over one of the most important dockets in this country, where matters of integrity are central to the confidence that you build not just within Kenyans on the economy, but also with our development partners and donors. Do you think, with such allegations being leveled against you, you are the right man for the job? Are you the man who will inspire confidence in the economy, considering that, as we have stated before, I think it's common knowledge among us Kenyans that our economy is not doing well at all, and we need a man in the National Treasury who will not only inspire confidence with Kenyans, but also with our development partners. Is that man really you, Professor, if there are allegations hanging over your head? Thank you.
Honorable Speaker?
Yes.
Okay.
Wonder.
Yes, I just want to pick it up from where Honorable Njuguna has left, Professor Njuguna Ndung'u. You know, as someone who is being nominated to be in charge of the national coffers, national treasury, you should ideally, like Caesar's wife, be beyond reproach. Unfortunately, despite your stellar record in academia, your long stint in the CBK, on the face of it, leaves a lot to be desired. Honorable Chungwa has mentioned just 2 issues, because it would appear that during a time in CBK, every single mega project that you undertook was dogged by matters of corruption. He's talked about the issue of the shillings 1.2 billion security tender. I'm sure you know about that. and the other one was what? Yes, and the Imperial Bank collapse, the collapse of the Imperial Bank. But I will just jog a memory. Because this is very important that we get it right from the word go. This is one docket that we can't gamble for as a country. We cannot. In fact, it is on record that the person who held this docket previously, I think the second last person to hold it, Mr. Rotich, was sent home on the basis of even less, on the basis of allegations which are even less serious than the ones which seem to face you. Let me mention just one or two. In the year 2012, the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly did indict you. In fact, it barred you from holding public office on account of irregular procurement of printing contract to De La Rue. I'm sure you will remember that. It went further to call for, to recommend for serious investigations into your conduct, and that if criminal culpability would be established, should be taken to court and charged. You may want to update us on what became of this. That is very important. Two is the issue of irregular sale of the Grand Regency Hotel in 2008, whilst you were at the helm of the Central Bank of Kenya. A report by the Commission of Inquiry into the sale of the Grand Regency Hotel that was chaired by Justice Coker, as he was known then, found you guilty of flouting procurement rules. It also went ahead to accuse you of lacking transparency, honesty, good faith, and of other unprofessional actions. Serious accusations that if you juxtapose with the tenets, the requirements of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, and the Article 10 of the Constitution on values and principles of governance, then you would even wonder why you are before us, before clearing your name. It would be this would be a travesty of justice and democracy and fairness. But I leave it at that. Yes.
Yes, Junet.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. Chair, I want to put to the nominee that in 2011, the year 2011, when you were the CBK governor, Professor Ndung'u, Parliament investigated you for collusion with commercial banks to weaken the Kenya shilling, which became the worst performing currency in the world then. Your failure to protect the shilling, coupled with your monetary policies, saw massive repatriation of US dollars from Kenya to money markets which collapsed the money market in the Kenyan territory, the Kenyan shilling. Even a Reuters, this survey, named you as one of the least effective bankers in Africa. With all these failures, what makes you so attractive to preside over Kenya's economy during even these harder times? And also, there is the issue of the collapsed Imperial Bank, Professor. The shareholders revealed in court filings that your spouse, Nancy Ndung'u, exhorted the then managing director of the bank, the late Abdul Malik Jan Mohammed. The bank paid for a holiday in a luxurious hotel in Thailand. When these things came to light, you were in a hurry to liquidate the bank and cover up your role. That's the accusation they're saying in court. What's your response to that? And lastly, since you left the CBK, Professor, things have changed in this country. There was a new constitution that came in place, and the budget-making process was taken to Parliament. Parliament is the one that, through the Budget and Appropriation Committee, is the one that looks into the budget of the country. We have had scenarios before, people who occupied the office before you, I mean that office you are seeking, that who are forcing Parliament without listening to the parliamentary budget department, forcing Parliament to do things in a certain way which have become counterproductive. And they want Parliament to rubber stamp everything that they prepare at the Treasury. What's your take? What is the role of Parliament in the budget-making process? Thank you.
Professor, you can handle those mouthfuls.
Thank you, Chair. And I really thank the questions that have come through. Let me take the same order they came through. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm aware the cost of living and even hardships are rising. And you can see that it is actually punctuated also by the overlapping multiple shocks that have hit the country, negative shocks. And negative shocks that are persistent are always very, very difficult to predict in terms of their magnitude, the quantum, and even direction. So in a sense, the world over is actually suffering from that. But we have a new dimension in the Horn of Africa, and especially in Kenya, because the drought effect is actually a very major supply-side shock that drives domestic prices and also drives energy prices. And this is where the pain, most pain is coming from. I do recall one time in my presentation to the Parliament, I argued that the then Parliamentary Committee in Finance, that we need to create buffers in the economy so that when there are supply-side shocks, we can actually at least mitigate in the short term. And those buffers, for example, related to food security. Of course, it's expensive to store cereals for a long time, but the best thing is actually to have resources to do that, to buy at that particular time. Energy resources, that is petroleum backups. And then, of course, we should have buffers in terms of fiscal space. And finally, we should have buffers from the central bank in terms of foreign exchange reserves. Those are four main buffers that can help us navigate in the short term. But unfortunately, when the shock hits us, for example, right now, if you look at that, it's only perhaps the central bank which has foreign exchange reserves. And you can see that essentially it's going to be problematic. But then, what we really need is actually physical intervention to create some space and even to save lives. But again, it comes in at a time when we don't have that fiscal space. Especially, you mentioned the debt. We are in agreement with that. I think right now, the way the situation is, given the multiple shocks, and even the supply-side shocks that are quite prevalent, the best would be to look for concession of financing that would retire most of the debt, especially the domestic debt, which is very, very expensive. It's taking quite a large proportion of recurrent expenditure, about to the tune of about 3%. So that will be the starting point. And then after that, we'll have some time, that is in the very short term. Then over time, the fiscal space can be rebuilt, including reforms that may come up actually to improve the revenue side. Because right now, the biggest problem is the revenue side. So essentially, one of the lessons that we should pick up from here is actually how to deal with supply-side shocks. It was always a problem even during my time. Because one of the things about the supply-side shock and monetary policy phenomena is that you have to actually tighten monetary policy to ride over the shocks. But essentially what you do is actually to push the economy into a temporary recession, hoping that once the supply shocks are resolved, we do not have that plateau of high prices. We will destroy that. But if there is pain, by the time you do that, and even when the supply-side issues are resolved, this is the pain we have to undergo, we have to wait for, but I do believe that the most important steps is always to make sure that we have fiscal space that can now allow us some flexibility to ride over the shocks. And that is going to be created by, first of all, resolving or profiling the debt that we have, having some concessional funding that is going to retire some of the most expensive domestic debt. And then from there, slowly, the fiscal space will build up, supply side will come back, will be coming slowly back to the market, and then we can now start looking for how do we create fiscal consolidation. The president has already signaled some signals about fiscal consolidation. And this is something that will continue, but it will not continue until we resolve the crisis facing us, and then we resolve the debt issues. That's how I would approach it. It should be a short-term problem that can be solved, but it has to take a bit of time. Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you for your fantastic questions. During my time, there is no bank that collapsed. I was governor of the Central Bank of Kenya from March 2007 to the beginning of March in 2015. That does not mean, Mheshimiwa Majority Leader Bwana Kimani Ichung'wah, that there were no problems. There were problems. But you have to make sure that you bring in or you develop new solutions and new interventions to save the market. And that's what we did. There were several mergers, but those mergers were actually geared towards preventing any collapse of the banks, because market situations do change. Some projections in marketplace can change. And so the regulator must know what to do. A regulator is not someone who is waving an axe in the market. A regulator is a person who is trying to understand the market, help develop the market, and the third one is regulate and protect the market. So those three dimensions are very, very important for a regulator. And that is what I did for most of the time that I was there. Now, of course, the affidavits that have come up, let me comment on them. One, the first point I would like to make, Mr. Chairman and honorable members who have asked this question, is that we want to stop at the first point of just mentioning what it is. We don't want to go further and see what has happened. The case, for example, for the procurement, I fought it through the courts to the Court of Appeal, and there was a judgment. The case of Grad Regency, I think the statement is that I was adversely mentioned. I was an agent of government, and this was a government-to-government sale, and I was the one to negotiate and to receive the payment, which was actually received by the government. And for your information, the end result was that it gained 3.114 billion shillings that was actually used in Lamu to dredge the port. The idea in government then was that such recovery from corruption proceeds should be used in fixed investments that would give Kenyans perpetual benefits. And that is how it was allocated there. There was a commission of inquiry that was started, but it was supposed to check whether the sale was appropriately done. Now, the whole issue was, how was it appropriately done? According to that commission, it valued the hotel at 1.8 billion. Then the question they were asked, what about the central bank? How did it value the hotel? It was at 2.2 billion. And then how much was the hotel sold by the central bank? It was sold at 2.8 billion. The difference between 2.8 billion and 3.114 is because of the retained earnings during the operations. So in a sense, it was value for money, and that was what the committee was supposed to establish. Let me state this, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, that we are, and especially for me, I've been a victim of abuse of the criminal justice system. For example, the procurement that has been mentioned, the whole idea was to get Ndung'u out of the central bank. How do you do it? That's why, even if you go to the records, you will just be embarrassed, the kind of facts. Now, the biggest problem I have, when Ichung'wah and the others who have asked the question, is that the National Human Rights Commission, the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, and the Transparency International should be coming to our aid as victims of abuse of the criminal justice system. But they are coming here to make us the victims. It's quite a paradox. It's actually extremely, I would like maybe to invite people to read even the judgment, even the Commission of Inquiry on Grad Regency. It's so interesting that they find it, that they become also a victim. It is something that we may want to check out, Mr. Chairman. It's something that we have to rethink about the mandate of some of these institutions, and it's something that we need to correct from the very beginning.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt the good professor, but I feel he is on a tangent now to blame the petitioners. I just wanted him to clarify, because that was my question, Professor. In the interest of the country and the economy, we want to, if we approve you, to approve someone that will be confident has no issues of integrity hanging over his head. And the opportunity now you have is to make that clear. And that's why I asked the status of the Grand Regency, which I have heard you've clearly stated that you are exonerated by the Commission of Inquiry. Well, I hear my colleague saying no. So we want to know what was the status. Okay. What is the status of the charges on the 1.2 billion tender? Mm-hmm. You know, it's good to say it went to court, all the way you fought it to Court of Appeal.
Thank you.
What was the verdict?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, the tender issue, let me first of all say that it was very clear that CEOs are not involved in the procurement. Their work is only to appoint the procurement committee. And that matter went all the way to the appeal, and they showed that the problem was the procurement committee of the central bank, and I was vindicated. I had no role to play. The Grad Regency, again, is an issue. I have shown that the government position was that the proceeds would be invested, and they were already invested in that case. And maybe I can go to, so in actual fact, my role was very, very clear as an agent. And my role was also very, very clear that I had no role to play in procurement. But I wanted to go further to show that actually when such issues come, although I'm trying to defend myself, when such issues come, also those people who bring them up, they should see the whole end.
Speaker, point of order. The nominee is not helping us make progress. For instance, he's saying about, talking about being vindicated in the Grand Regency cell. He's not saying by who. Because the report of the commission is clear that you are indicted. Yeah, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With due respect, and maybe I will seek your protection because I have never seen the report. I only remember that the government said those proceeds that the central bank has done well for raising that kind of money. It was invested in Lamu Port, and you are aware of that. And the whole conclusion was that if such resources coming from corruption proceeds are invested in the projects that provide perpetual benefits, then everybody is happy. Let me also move on to, sorry.
Yes, Chungwa.
Maybe as a procedural matter of guidance to the committee, with all due respect to my colleague, the leader of minority. I don't know when, as a committee, we allude to a report. Is it not in order then, as a procedural issue, that a copy of that report is shared with the committee so that either the nominee or other members of the committee are able to benefit from that? So that, Honorable Speaker, we avoid the issues of raising issues to the public gallery. And I say that with a lot of respect to my brother, because the earlier nominee who was here, Professor Kindiki, had the same issue on an issue that my brother was not able to, again, clear up properly, that indeed the allegations were against the law firm of Onesmus Kipchumba Murkomen and Company, not the law firm of Honorable Kindiki. So maybe, Speaker, you could guide us on that issue.
There were affidavits, 1 or 2, sent to the committee through the clerk. I instructed that they be furnished to the nominee. I believe you have been served. And I did hear the 2 members make reference to those affidavits. I would encourage the nominee to answer questions. That's why I said precise and concise. when we go on to a long journey, we end up stumbling somewhere. So I would want you, Professor, the 3 questions that were asked that cast aspersions on your integrity by Chungwa, Wandai, and Junet, just answer them straight and clear. Are they true? They are not. Was there a court process? How did it end? Did your wife go to Thailand on holiday paid by Imperial Bank? Was it Imperial Bank? If it wasn't, because it's an allegation being raised by Junet, I've seen no evidence that it happened. Did it happen or did it not? It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Chair, not to interrupt you, Chair, with your indulgence. Also, you know, we are unanswered. The nominee alluded in his response that even the report of the commission made him a victim. He said that when he was responding. So that means he's privy to the commission's report.
And even then,
I think he was on
Kenya Human Rights Commission.
On a struggle to defend himself. He said he's been a victim of many things.
Yeah.
So now that we have put him on track, let's hear his answers to your questions, which I'm sure he's privy to.
Thank you, Chairman. I get your advice, and I'll take. I'll be in that tandem. Let me say that in the first issue and the second issue, I think what I've said is that I've defended myself in terms of I defended myself through the court process. The Commission of Inquiry in terms of the Grad Regency, I was asked to surrender the money to dredge the Ramu port. All the proceeds were given.
You were asked as Njuguna Ndung'u or as governor of the central bank?
As governor of the central bank, and also the agent who transacted that particular deal. The printing contract that Mheshimiwa Junet, with due respect, thank you very much, that matter came to Parliament, it was debated, and in the end, it was not the central bank that determined the printing contract because it was there even before I joined in. And so I was exonerated on that, and the reports are very clear. I've never been involved in contract for publishing, for any currency printing. And again, the Treasury also went into joint venture with the Deraru, and that is how the issues were determined. So it was not a purview of the central bank, and the matter was dissolved that way in the central bank. The Imperial Bank never collapsed when I was in the central bank. I had already left, and it was several years when I had left. And the bottom line is that I was never part of that, and I never flouted, and also the flouting of the procurement rules. I never flouted any rules because in the then law, since then they have been revised, and bear me with that. Since then, the procurement law has been revised. The CEO of an organization, his role was, or his or her role was to appoint the procurement committee. If the procurement committee made a decision, the CEO could not vary that decision. Since then, and I had already left the central bank, things have changed and the law has been revised. Let me also say, the issue of banks propping the sharing, that was not correct. It is like the same situation we are in now. We are having supply-side shocks, and because of the persistent shocks, you can see the dollar supply has been minimal. And so in a sense, when you look at our current account deficit, it is the one that signals whether the currency is going to depreciate or appreciate. And that is the same situation with external shocks, and this is consistent with the African economies. Again, we went through the motion with a special parliamentary committee on that, and we dissolved the matter that actually this was the preference. That is why, Mr. Chairman, I mentioned that I had issues with saying, how do we create buffers that help us to mitigate short-term shocks? And the whole issue, then the whole issue of Imperial Bank and my wife going to Thailand, this is a paid service. It was an agent of that company that was giving those the services, and it was
Did you hear what he asked?
Yes.
he said, or rather he alleged, that in certain proceedings, the former owner of Imperial Bank alleged that he paid for an expensive holiday for your family. When you learned of it, you cut short the holiday, came back, and collapsed the bank. That's what he alleged.
Yes,
and that's what you should respond to.
Thank you, Chairman. The bank collapsed in 2017, and I was not governor then, and I was even away from the country. I was working from outside the country. So it did not collapse in when I was governor. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, just for your indulgence, Chair. You see, two issues, Chair. The issue of the shilling that I raised, it is true that the scenario looks like now. But, Chair, just as a supplementary question, the shilling now is stuck at that level. By that time, a committee of parliament was formed, and I suspect you were in parliament by then. Then, after the investigation of parliament ended in a month or a month and a half, the shilling came back from 120, came back to 90. So it looked like a setup. Then lastly, Chair, did the trip to Thailand happen or did it not happen, in spite of the bank collapsing in 2017?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Let me say this. Once the crisis has been resolved, then there is inflow of foreign exchange. And because we have an open capital account and a floating exchange rate, the appreciation will always take place because the depreciation is coming because of scarcity. And that's what happened. You can even produce graphs to that effect. That is, I wanted to correct that. The trip to Thailand took place in 2014. And then the agent of that was himself, I can't remember the name of the one you have mentioned. And we were paying him in advance to go. So it was a trip that was paid for. You pay him. So it took place, we paid.
He was an agent.
He was an agent of that particular resort. And you paid him directly. And then and all those details are there.
Pay for the holiday?
I paid for that holiday for my wife.
Okay.
Yes.
We now have another batch of 4. Owen Bayer, Gikaria, Mule, Emase.
Yes, can I go ahead, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
To make good progress, Professor, listen to the questions very carefully and answer them as precisely and concisely as you can.
Okay.
When you embark on a misadventure, you land into a series of problems for no reason.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Speaker and Chair. Away from the personal issues that, of course, you've gone through, I want now to focus on what is now and the position that you have been nominated to. We would like to know, as Kenyans, what is your vision as CS for Treasury? You handled the central bank. It was a different institution. It was a regulator. It did many other things. Now you're coming to full public service. You're coming into the ministry, which very many people in this country blame it for the kind of economic mess that we are in. What is your vision for Treasury and economic planning? How are you going to solve the problems that are now here? The problems of skyrocketing prices, the problems of the fuel, the subsidy issue. And the hustlers out there are looking at you as the person that are going to redeem them. How are you going to do this? What is your vision? If we know your vision, we'll be able to know where you will take us, and that you'll have less of the issues that you had at Central Bank. Secondly, Speaker, the current CS has pronounced that he cannot disburse money to CDF because he says the court ruled. But we also know the court, and Kenyans know the court ruled on the issue of the CDF Act 2013, not the NGCDF that is subsisting now. Members of Parliament and Kenyans know the benefit of having CDF. On the fiat of a ruling on a previous act, Kenyans have been denied that money. Would you disburse CDF? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe Ndung'u, the nominee Treasury. You know, at the end of the day, it is what is collected that has to be spent. So as Parliament, we will do budgets, the government, the executive will do a lot of budgets, but at the end of the day is what is collectible that can be able now to translate and actualize the policy and the government expenditure that is there. So, one of the issues that has come up of late is that taxation has been politicized to an extent that some people look like they are being targeted. So one of the questions among politicizing tax collection is that our revenue collection currently, which stands at 2.2 trillion this financial year, but the debt, public debt is so huge. So what innovations are strategies that you're going to have to employ and grow that revenue collection of this country without necessarily, you know, just thinking of taxation to the poor or getting a lot of money? Which other methodology would you come up with to collect enough money to be able to meet our budget requirement? Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Professor. Honorable Mule Matungulu. At the current situation in the country economically, we are under serious distress of hardship economically, and we would wish to hear from you as the person to turn around the situation. How will you put the directive which has been given by the President of cutting down the costs of the budget by 300 billion in 2022-2023 budget to allow relief for Kenya's spending and borrowing pressure, and at the same time look at that vis-a-vis the intention of job cuts within the country, whereas when campaign trail was on, we promised that we are going to grow the economy as quickly as possible in the framers of bottom-up. Yes, the job cut to make sure that this realization of the 300 billion is evident. And it will definitely affect serious programs of the government like public-private partnership, PPPs, whereby the framework rests squarely with Treasury. How are you going to sync that with the particular ministries which will be involved in all the PPEs to save this country? Thank you.
Thank you. To the nominee, what is your take on the President's push for the National Social Security Fund contribution to be enhanced, considering the hard times where every Kenyan is concerned about the rising cost of living? What's your take on that?
Professor, you can answer those four, then we take another batch.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I'm very sorry also for moving into different direction. Perhaps it's the teacher in me. I never left anything ununderstood because that is my, but I'll try to be as precise as possible. Thank you so much, Mheshimiwa Owen Baya, for that question. The vision for Kenya. We do know that we have very serious short-term constraints. But let me say that in terms of the vision, I can pinpoint 4 areas that we are going to work on, and obviously those areas are going to give us a very strong economy from the medium term to long term, once we solve the short-term constraints. And the first one, being brief, is actually that we have to start by protecting private investments. And this is the whole area of human capital development. Our education system, for example, our health system, the health infrastructure has been devoured by COVID-19. We didn't anticipate the extent to which our health infrastructure can be tested. Not even beyond even what we have health financing. And the third aspect of that is actually nutrition outcomes. And this is actually, again, food markets and how we can actually grow the human capital development arena. That for us is going to be very important. And it starts from fixing the problems in health, in education, and in food systems, which will improve the nutrition outcome. That's one whole bucket of where we have to do some major issues in the medium term. The second one, which needs to start when everything, even when things are as severe as they are, is, Mr. Chairman, to develop, to regulate, and protect markets. And this is where things have gone wrong, and I'm sure, Mheshimiwa Baya, you can also come up with so many examples. If markets are not properly governed, then it means that they cannot distribute the economic rent in the marketplace. If we don't develop the markets, then most people are not going to reach the markets. To give you an example, it is markets provide signals, especially for increased production downstream and productivity downstream. That is the bottom of the people who are working there, be it in agriculture, be it in another sector. But what you see upstream is increased incomes. So it means that we can actually, in the very short term, try to start fixing markets. And for me, that is a very major issue. Let me tie the second point also. The third point is also tied to what my dear sister asked in terms of, my friend asked about the current situation. The third area is actually domestic resource mobilization. We have, this is a family of instruments that we can actually optimize the tax instruments, for example. He talked about even criminalizing taxation. It's because we need to optimize taxation, tax instruments. And we need to come up and develop the family of instruments in the domestic resource mobilization space to improve our revenue base. But then coming back to you, remember the last time I visited this issue was 2001. I was analyzing how to optimize taxation on excisable products, and one of them was alcohol. And I showed that you can actually optimize it by knowing that if you go, every tax system has a lava curve. You can actually optimize if you know exactly the demand structure of the product. So our tax system and even tax instruments can be optimized on the basis of the structure of the targeted product that they are getting. And that is consistent with the question that was asked by Bwana Rukaria. It means we can build the base. And finally, in this space, Bwana Mbaya, and the questions that have been raised, I do believe that we have succeeded in the digital evolution. We have taken part in that. The digital evolution has worked for us. Everybody is now talking about the fourth industrial revolution. The beauty about it is that it is going to coordinate all the other factors that I've mentioned. The protecting the private investment, developing, protecting and regulating markets, domestic resource mobilization will be coordinated by the digital space and the fourth industrial revolution. We are going to see a lot of that. These issues need not wait for us to resolve the crisis. They will start in earnest. But let me tell you that they are going to spin the economy, and we are going to see a lot of benefits. That means that I have also looked at the issues, Mheshimiwa Rukaria, you have mentioned. Thank you very much. And the most important thing is to make sure that I'm not going back to the history of creating social contracts,
I'm in the quadrant of saying, actually, you can raise incentives for you paying taxes if taxes are not high enough for you to dodge them. You know, the other day, Mr. Chairman, I asked the KRA, why do you believe that high tax rates will give you high tax revenue, whereas the whole world knows that that's the converse? And we are back to the question that is being raised. Let's look at every tax instrument in terms of how we can optimize it. And Mheshimiwa Mule, thank you very much for your questions. The economic situation is terrifying. The four issues that I have identified are very, very important for us to turn around. But we turn around with also two very important points. One of them is actually how to strengthen our institutions, be they the institutions that regulate the market, the institutions that protect the market. There are two very important characteristics of institutions that I work for and I really like to achieve. One of them is to define the legal framework or the rules of the game. And the second one is actually to define appropriate incentives. And a combination of the legal framework and appropriate incentives, that is the reward system, you are rewarded when you do well, you are penalized when you do badly. It's consistent with the issues that Junet was raising and Bwana Ishongwa. Then you're going to encourage prudent behavior in the marketplace. This is where we are, and that is how things will work and will work positively. I do believe that some of these are medium-term solutions, but most of them are short-term. We start now in creating a very important base, and we'll get there. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Mr. Bach.
Man, on the question of CDF, I didn't hear anything.
Professor.
It's the CDF.
Yes, CDF.
I was conscious.
And it is so easy.
Yeah,
the one.
Thank you.
I don't want us to go academic again. He said CDF is very important. Even the head of state has acknowledged that. If and when you are confirmed as Minister for the Treasury, are you going to honor, respect, and disperse CDF to Parliament?
Thank you, Chairman. You have made it very clear for me. But I will be guided by the law, and I will abide by the law, because essentially that is what we'll do. But I will honor that as per the law demands. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Now,
yes, there's a point of.
Yes, Speaker, allow me to, Chair, now let me call you Speaker because you are Speaker, allow me
I would rather you seek clarification other than point of order, because this is not a debate.
Okay.
Yes.
Well guided. Clarification. What did the professor say about CDF? Abiding by the law, saying what?
He said he will look at the law,
let me
be guided appropriately, and then pay.
What did he say?
That's what he said.
What? Isn't that so? Is that not Kingereza Mingi? What we say, Speaker? No. Let us not miss the point. Honorable Baya said the truth.
Seek your clarification.
That's why I'm helping. Maybe he left the point. That what was quashed in court is actually a different law, CDF Act. What we have now, Speaker, is not CDF Act. We have National Government Constituency Development Fund. Now he was asked, how quickly are you going to use that to disband the funds? Kizungu mingi haitasaidia sisi, Speaker.
Okay, you'll start with that, but let's take another batch of 4.
Okay.
Then you can clarify to Honorable Posing what is 6 to be clarified. Morugara, Daoud, Amisi, and Naisula. I'll come to you guys, gentlemen. Just hold your horses.
Thank you.
And I want to be strict on one question each.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just before I ask the question is a little bit of economics that we are getting from the nominee, and Kenyans are listening to us so that they are able to understand what the nominee is promising them in a very plain English language. My question is this. We have had hue and cry out there that the country does not have money. And therefore, we are in trouble. What is your position as a senior economist in the country, a former governor of the Central Bank of Kenya? Do we have the money, which means soon we may be out of the doldrums where we are, or we do not have any money, therefore we have to tighten our belts because worse things are ahead of us?
Thank you, Chair Speaker. Speaker, to the nominee, I don't know if he would be aware that his peers, or the peers in the Treasury, has already instructed the police department to return vehicles, 204 vehicles back, which were leased during the elections. And the policy, if that is the policy which would be there, it would be very wrong. Regarding dollar deposits, Chair, we are being told that there is no money, like my colleague has asked. But it was in the public domain that the dollar deposits in Kenya are at an all-time high. People in Kenya have got dollar deposits in dollar accounts in Kenya to the tune of 915 billion. I don't know if it's dollars or shillings, but it's the highest, it's double. And people are hoarding dollars in Kenya. So there is no, the rate we are now looking at as of today is 121, which has been created artificially. Can the governor tell us how he would handle that? Because once that comes into the market, then the balance of trade and the payments, everything will go down. But until you do not tackle those cartels, or is it, how would we get those people, that dollars into the market at a lower rate? Thank you.
Daud, you have said so much just to ask a question, you know. Amazing.
Thank you, Chair.
I know it's good to tax before you take off, but try and take off without excessive taxing.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this is a position that Kenyans are waiting for, because even the occupant of this position is required to exercise the highest epitome of financial management. And looking at what you furnish us with, Professor, declaration of wealth. First of all, Chair, I think we need to also make a clarification to this net worth issue, because even Kimani Ichung'wah will agree with me, net worth is your total assets minus total liabilities, but I think what has been quoted before is not the case. Nevertheless, if you look at what you've quoted, family home, farm with house, holiday home, basically those are homes. A total, whether it's a family home, holiday home, leisure home, they are homes. The total is 400 million. Somebody will ask, before even going to the rest, out of 941, 400 goes to homes. Is this the advice you are going to give to Kenyans, that half of your health is a home? Because that's where management of resources and the gauge to how you can run our economy, it starts with you as an individual. You look at the list of the wealth. I don't know whether you came here by walking, because there's no car listed. But according to my knowledge, a car is an asset. And this is a person Kenyans wants to see exercising the highest epitome of financial management. And it starts with what you present to this committee. I want you to clarify, even these shares, piece of agriculture land, how many acres? Investment, financial instrument, what is the shares or dividends? Investments through family company, 400 million. What is it that is 400 million? Shares in a bank, which bank? Imperial, which one is this bank? So this is how a Kenya is going to gauge of the individual that is going to be at the highest financial management institution. Really, we need to be serious.
Miss, you have made statement. What is your question.
One, whether he owns a car because not stated there. Two,
but is he obligated to own a car? There are many people who don't own cars.
The statement
The
of
most
assets.
distinguished lawyer called John Hamino doesn't know how to drive, doesn't own cars, but he travels.
I think the professor can just answer what he can on my description. He knows what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker. Honorable Camino, your friend, doesn't own those kinds of homes also. Those homes require cars.
Naisula, in this batch.
Thank you, Chair. I promise not to weep or be long in this one. So, to the nominee, the number of unemployed youths in Kenya is estimated at 14%, according to the International Labour Organization, and as many as 5.2 million youth adults are unable to find meaningful employment, a pressing concern to policymakers. So my question to you is, how do you intend to turn things around to grow the economy, to specifically secure the millions of jobs that the Kenya Kwanza government promised our youths?
Professor, you can deal with those four.
Thank you, Chairman and honorable members, for those questions. And let me start with the issue of CDF. And I said that I'll be guided by the law because we have to say the commitments must be made. But of course, they must be consistent with the law. Mheshimiwa Junet actually said there have been a finance committee that has also been talking to the Treasury. They cannot spend more than they are allowed by the law. So we'll be consistent with the law. That is my answer. I don't know which laws the court ruling is a question of checking on that and saying that are we, and we are going to consult also in the relevant organizations of government so that everything is clear. But we cannot fail to honor if the law also permits that. That's my simple answer for that. And thank you very much, Mheshimiwa Murugara. I think I do understand, and we are starting from a very difficult situation. And so, when you are in a difficult situation, how do you get out of the difficult situation? His Excellency the President has been using a very nice phrase of, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging, try to get out. You know. So essentially, there are some short-term issues that we'll deal with. That's why I started by saying, the current thinking by the government right now, which I buy quite a lot, and I have a lot of discussions with the donors. We were, for example, with the donors who are providing food relief, we argued that we may need concessional borrowing, which will help us remove the very expensive domestic debt. And then once that is done, the fiscal space will start building, and then we can start signaling fiscal consolidation. If the government doesn't have fiscal space, it means that it cannot finance development. That's the main issue, and that is the main spin that we want to make sure that we have. If I had the time, one day I can talk about the crowding out, because it actually affects everyone. So it's something, but how do we resolve it? It's actually coming back to trying to create fiscal flexibility by the government so that it will do that. And if this committee approves me, that is the goal that I will start moving towards, fiscal flexibility so that we jump into specifics and trying to help out. And thank you, Mheshimiwa Daud. I didn't know that there were 200 vehicles leased out, but again, it's something that I will look at. Let me say this. When the crisis was started biting, and especially the whole world, it's only the US Fed that actually started tightening their monetary policy. And you can see even Euro started being affected because they were not following suit. When everybody followed suit, there was a whole tightening, even in Kenya here. And so the signaling is that there will be scarcity of dollars. So the dollars that you mentioned in terms of deposits, they are owned by individuals. And so everybody moves into a different direction because they're anticipating that there will be tightening. So the whole issue is to say, once the crisis is over, we are going to see dollar flows. The other day I was talking even to several farms, like even tea exporters. They are stockpiling their quantity. the Ukrainian crisis is such that we cannot export the products that we used to export there. We cannot take tea to Pakistan, for example, because of the flood. So there is a bit of a shock in terms of the supply. So we are not getting the dollar froze. But I do believe that it will come through. You have mentioned about the cartels. This is, again, something I went back to talking about markets. How do we develop markets? How do we regulate markets? How do we protect markets? And why you protect markets is because of the cartels. And you are right. And this is something that I mentioned as a very important second pillar that we are going to deal with. So the situation will be dealt with in that way. Yes, I understand your point about financial management. If you are an investor, you look at what is the appropriate returns at a particular time, and you change over time. What I was required to provide is my net worth given the current situation. Why do people invest in homes? Because they have safe returns. If tomorrow manufacturing sector is better, we will invest there. As an investor, and this, by the way, is a whole congregate of my family and myself, including the cars that we own. We did not break them down. Okay? I came here with a company car, which is an international organization, so essentially that's why you didn't find specifics. But the most important thing is to tell you that even yourself, you'll wake up tomorrow to invest on the basis of the returns that you see. If the information in the market shows that you're going to get into a loss, you are going to change your investment pattern. So if I observe your investment today, they will be different with the next 10 years to come. And that is the composition. That is what it is all about. Once we create a boom in other sectors of the economy, we'll find everybody flocking into those areas and start earning economic rents from them. Thank you very much for talking about the unemployed youth. And the essence, and I shared, because I talked to, I started with I raised some of those issues. I talked about markets because I wanted to make it very clear that it is
clarification.
Honorable Missy.
Sorry for interruption, but where we need to be very keen is the net worth, because it is a repeated question. Can the professor tell us, in his understanding, what is net worth and where is his liability in this statement?
I think what I provided was the net worth. I have no liabilities that sorry. I calculate, by the time I move out, I'm asked for the net worth. That is what I computed and provided. Yeah. Then I wanted to go back to the youth issue, because the youth issue is very, very important. And I think, Madam, the whole issue, what I talked about the markets is that is the kernel of bottom-up approach.
All the Naisula Lesoda. It's called Honorable Naisula.
Naisula. I didn't write, write the name. It was so fast. Thank you so much. But the whole idea, look at it this way. We have looked at the youth issue from even the demographic transition, from very, very, very many dimensions. But we do believe, and I strongly believe, and I agree with the government here, and the bottom-up approach is that once we structure the market, once we develop different markets in different segments of the economy, and once we actually protect those markets and govern them well, then it means that you can join in the market and make a living. There will be interventions that may be required for you to participate in that particular market. And that's why everybody is talking about the manifesto for Kenya Kwanza, where we talk about the Hustler Fund. The Hustler Fund is an intervention to help you join in that market. We do believe that most of our youth have a lot of potential, but they need interventions or support to get into those markets. Given that as we move in that direction, I can promise you the demographic dividend will be in sight for us. But the most important thing is to say that those markets where they participate in is where we want to provide interventions, and that is what is going to happen. And the interventions are creating appropriate funds, but also creating appropriate ventures, market signals that are going to help in terms of that market, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I hope I was brief.
Raso, Honorable Sharia, Emasa, you have already had a bite. Robert Mbui, Ferdinand, Mishi, and Koech. We'll take now more than 4, Professor, so that you answer and respond to all of them. So start with Honorable Raso, Honorable Shurie, Honorable Ferdinand, Honorable Mbui, Honorable Mishi, and Honorable Koech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Professor, by Kenyan standards, you are a wealthy man. If I go to your pro bono, development of 2 classes at Gathange Primary, 250,000. Develop 2 classrooms at Gacharage Dispensary, 20,000. That adds up to 620,000. If I look at your net wealth, that is 0.006%. What is your philosophy on wealth creation and prosperity sharing? Because you say you represent the hustlers. Finally,
question at a time.
Finally, there is this move in the UK where the new Chancellor advised the Prime Minister on the economics. And it has really caused a big hue and cry in the UK that they say that that government must go. What do you say about the President saying that we must first tax wealth based on actually what you have supplied the committee this morning? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Professor, we've had one issue that we've been grappling with the National Assembly, is the application of Article 223 by the National Treasury. In your view, what do you think is the remedy available to the legislature in the circumstances where such expenditures do not meet the threshold of a supplementary budget as espoused in the article, the PFM Act and its attendant regulations?
Very good. Ferdinand, one question.
The 2, but I didn't restrict myself to 1. The local blame game, Professor, is that the government wastage and the huge public bills that we see around, and that is actually contributing to the huge recurrent expenditure. In your view, for us to be able to grow, what do we need to do to reduce the current expenditure in the government for the economy to grow? I think let's come up, because I know that that's the local blame game, a huge government wastage. Thank you.
Robert Mbui.
Thank you, Chair. The nominee has severally mentioned the bottom up, and I have heard it being mentioned also and touted as an economic model. And now a proposal to come up with a fund that you are calling the Hustler Fund. Kindly explain very clearly what is the difference between that fund and the Uwezo Fund, which has been in existence without interest, the Youth Enterprise Fund, which exists without interest, Women Enterprise Fund, all those funds. What is the difference between those and the Hustler Fund? And Chair, I want you to look at the declaration of wealth form that the nominee has given us. He's indicated in the description of properties that he owns 8 items. The last item, Chair, is shares in a bank, and that part has been left blank. Was it deliberate? Because you've indicated yourself shares in a bank, but you have not put a figure.
The next was Mishi. Sorry, Mishi, I was checking a document.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, away from slashing the 300 billion from the budget, it has been talked that the KRA the KRA is going to be pushed to collect around 3 trillion. And some of the option, it is in the name of expanding the tax bracket. My question is, how do you assure Kenyans, the poor Kenyans, those the Kenya Kwanza refer them as hustlers, that they are not going to be the target of the KRA in terms of expanding tax brackets? And in the same perspective, how do you intend to resolve tax collection disputes in a humane manner without affecting our revenue targets? In the past, Honorable Chair, tax collection has been politicized in a way that some government officers have been aggressively demanding for taxes from Kenyans without considering their plight and sustainability of their businesses. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Koech.
Mine is on fiscal distress. We gather that the country is in a very bad shape at the moment, that today our credit rating is actually affected, and it is estimated that our total debt constitutes 67.4% of our nominal GDP, which roughly translates to 8.8 trillion. It is also estimated that our debt service now stands at 1 trillion. The cost of interest on our debt is now the single largest expenditure item on the recurrent budget, and it is threatening to paralyze the operations of both levels of government. In your view, Mr. Nominee, what factors have plunged the country into such huge fiscal distress, and what innovative ways will you put in place to deal with this debt? Thank you.
Yes, Professor.
Thank you, Chairman and honorable members. Fantastic questions that come through. Let me try to see how I get them throughout. And let me start with the question that was raised on pro bono. And pro bono is you actually invest your flows. You don't invest. You are trying to support some targeted groups. And I think maybe the figures were not correct, because the 2 classrooms that were done were 2.1 million. And some of them may have been spaced. But what I'm really saying is that I am a private individual. And what I was doing is to use my flows, because you cannot invest through, you cannot disrobe your assets to invest in pro bono. It's in flows on the basis of request and verified request. So that continues, and as long as they are verifiable requests. For me, I was supporting schools because I do believe that, and especially polytechnics, because I do believe that the youth can find their way. So essentially, I don't have a lot of allocation because one of the things I have to do is to educate my children, and I have been doing that. Obviously, you do that. You actually provide pro bono on the basis of the balances that you have. Then you're right about their advice to the government, and obviously different aspects. Let me put it this way. I would like to encourage the KRA to participate in taxing where there is a boom, the sector that is booming. It should also participate. But those taxes should not distort the market. They should not distort the allocation of resources. They should not create incentives to run away from taxes. And those are the principles that we would want to promote. And once we promote that, I'm sure the tax system is going to work very well. And it's also consistent with Mheshimiwa Mishi in terms of saying the poor are not going to be target. We are actually going to make sure that the taxation system should make sure that it does not distort the market, does not create incentive for you to run away. But it should create a very efficient way. For example, I talked about the digital platforms. They are going to help us in terms of correcting taxes in a way that doesn't also distort the market structure and even the demand structure of the products in question. For me, that is very, very important. How do we structure that? We structure that in terms of consultation, in terms of how the market is, how the structure of demand in the market, and also how the economic situation is. For example, you saw that during the COVID, there were quite a lot of consideration from so many organizations, including banks, in terms of lowering the effects of the impact of the tax. application of 223, this is a difficult concept, but it's essentially the whole issue, and I think I borrow also from Mheshimiwa Junet, who said that the Parliamentary Committee on Finance and even Budget, they all observe, they are watching in terms of what is happening. I think the most important thing is to make sure that the expenditures or the functional expenditures are also consistent with the rate down law, and that is going to be very, very important. And this has happened, and the government is trying to swim, the current government, even in its own transition, is trying to swim through it. But what solutions? Every day, when you have a problem, you generate solutions of what should be done. It is now tightening the whole issue of how much, and the Parliament is actually going to be responsible for this to try to say how much, what flexibility do you have even within the Article 223. You're not changing the law, but you're changing the guidelines. And I do believe that guidelines work well to shape the current constraints, to shape the market consideration, and also to guide us in terms of where we should be. And I do believe that is fantastic. I do agree with you in terms of wastage, Mheshimiwa Ferdinand. But we have to ask ourselves, how do we achieve the best results? We have to start talking about how do we prioritize the areas that we want to target and invest in, and how do we target those areas in terms of what we have done, and finally, how do we monitor and evaluate the results, because they have to be consistent with the results. So we have to create that awareness in terms of the priorities we want to have, and list the priorities. Some of those priorities can be time-bound, and then we want to see whether we have results. Can we evaluate that? And if the totality of the results was to make sure that the economy grows, it is not only going to improve the welfare, but it's also going to improve the tax collection. And that is why I do believe that is extremely important. Mheshimiwa
Speaker, I'm not satisfied with the answer.
Just a clarification.
Yeah, because we're talking about the government massive wastage and huge public salaries and what have you. So what are you going to do to tame that? That's what has been a blame game out here. So you have told me the scenario as it is.
Thank you,
so
Chair.
what are you going to do if I have to make you the minister for?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I alluded to this earlier, and I said that one of the things is actually to understand where did the rain beat you. The first thing is to make sure that you have stringent measures in terms of containing that. I argued earlier that we need to come up with some concessional funding to actually try to resolve the current constraints. Once you are out of those constraints, then you come down to prioritize which areas, which wastage, for example, what you're really saying, can we cut? And how do we restrict those? How do we create formidable regulations and guidelines in terms of curtailing those wastage? But right now, you have to get out of the problem we are in. I do know that the wage bill is quite high. Then the next thing, what do you need to do with the wage bill? What kind of rationalization measures do you need to do? The promise I am giving you right now is to say that whatever areas that we focus on, we want to make sure that we have sustainable footprint in terms of policy, in terms of actions, in terms of guidelines. That is the only way we can survive to the next decade. If we have sustainable guidelines, sustainable frameworks that can be tested over time. And that is the way I was trying to approach it, so that I don't want to specifically talk about any issue, wage bill or all that, but I'm really saying that we need to come up and prioritize. We need to target. But in all those actions, they have to be sustainable. They have to be seen to be sustainable and time-bound. And that is going to be very, very important. Thank you. Then I was going to Mheshimiwa Mishi and the KRA. I think I've talked about that. The Kenyans, we cannot target when you are in such a dire situation, when poverty is biting and cost of living is rising. That is not the time to increase taxes or retarget taxes. That is the time to look at areas where you can provide interventions. So it means that when I talked about the bottom-up approach, I was talking about those areas that you participate in, those markets, we need to regulate them. Most of the time, the poor and in the markets they participate in, it's not because they don't work hard. They work hard, but the market is captured. That elite capture itself diminishes the economic rent that you should otherwise get. And it's an area that we are going to talk about and try to fix. But the other thing I promised and also talked about, when I talked about the digital space, we have worked so well. We have seen that we can use the retail electronic payments platform to actually pay taxes. When it was started, everybody was very happy about it. It removes that personal interaction between the taxman and the taxpayer. And we have seen, even in one of the papers that I've prepared in the last 2-3 years or so, it showed that some of those taxes that uses the payments platform are actually performing much better. The whole issue is to try and see how do we protect that goose that laid the golden egg. That is the main point, and that is the policy of taxation that I came up with. I talked about, please do not raise tax rates to the point where it becomes an inducement for you to evade taxes. That is, you're killing the goose that laid the golden egg unless you want to say bye-bye to the golden egg. Mheshimiwa Koech, thank you very much about this growing fiscal distress and the debt. Last December, we had a special issue of a journal where we talked about growing with debt. So essentially, it's an area that I'm quite comfortable with. When the HIPIC initiative was started, in 1997 by the IMF, the first paper in that book was our paper, and we argued that external debt is a major problem. So we didn't know that domestic debt would also become a major problem. So we are in the same space. We have to look for avenues and solutions to make sure that it works, and that is what we want to make sure that it works. I think Mheshimiwa Bui, the Hasra Fund.
Yes, Mary Emase, Honorable.
Yes, through you, Mr. Speaker, I need to remind the nominee he hasn't addressed my question. I think just to refresh his mind, my question was on the push to enhance contributions for NSSF in view of the prevailing economic situation.
Yeah.
How will it in any way alleviate the situation? What are your thoughts on it? You have not addressed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I was coming to it. Maybe it's the way I wrote my notes.
We'll finish with Mbui, then
Bwana Mbui, let me come to you. And the Hasra Fund is an intervention. The biggest problem with the intervention is that when you make it special that other people cannot join in, it becomes a problem. It is the entry point that we really need to analyze. And especially the targeted market and how you, and this is going to be constructed on the basis that it is targeting specific group of people in different sectors of the economy, and the entry points must be clear and understood. And this is, the biggest problem is that it is not, an intervention should not be for everyone, but how do you actually prevent that everyone joins in, or how do you make sure that it works? It is the guidelines that you're going to prevent. And I'm sure once the Hasra Fund and the whole product is developed, you'll see that, and I'm sure you'll have a chance to interrogate it and see how it is going to be done. Declaration, I think I made a mistake. The last part was lumped with the shares in a bank was lumped with the other investments. So it's a mistake that it was put as a number on its own. But of course, I wouldn't want to say that there was an error. It is just the numbering that was a mistake. I think we go back, Mheshimiwa, sorry that your question was not missed. The whole issue was how do we look at NSSF? How is it going to save you if it's your future retirement benefits? Some of us in our working life, what we have done is to make sure that we match what the employer has given you, we match it. What you are really doing is to safeguard your future. What we need to do is to come back and start talking, that is consultation, and saying, how much would you be prepared to actually save? So essentially, it's not a punishment. You are saving for the future. And that is something that we can actually deal with and say, what is the optimal level of your sacrifice today to help you in future? The whole issue of savings and raising savings in Africa, and especially in Kenya, is a major debate because you cannot invest if you have no savings. So the whole issue is to come back to you as a worker and ask, how much are you willing to save now? If your employer is giving you this much, can you match it or even pay more than that? You are safeguarding your future. And that is something that is a democratic choice for most people, but it's also important to make sure that we have an awareness so that there is no targeting. It's not saying that we need this number. What we actually need is savings. How much do you want to save and what do you want to save for? And that has been a major issue around us.
Thank you, Professor. I want us to close here, unless there's something really burning. Junet, I'll give you 30 seconds.
1 minute, Chair. Chair, this is a very important issue because, Chair, if the nominee is approved, now this is one of the ministry that is going to have the highest interaction with Parliament because of the budget making process. And I had asked that question, but it was not answered because of Article 221. And the article says nominee, and this is the same thing that was reminded your predecessors. Rotich, when he came for vetting, he said he's going to engage. This is the longest serving chairman of budget committee now is the majority leader. This has been the biggest problem between Parliament and Treasury, and it has not been resolved. So I want to put it to you whether you will be the one, if you are approved, you are the one who will resolve it. It says the National Assembly shall consider the estimates submitted under Clause 1 together with the estimates submitted by the Parliamentary Service Commission, the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, and Article 127 and 173. And 4, before the National Assembly considers the estimates of the revenue expenditure, a committee of the Assembly shall discuss and review the estimate review the estimates and make recommendations not to Treasury but to the Assembly. Now what happens normally, Treasury, they go and make their budget estimates and bring it to Parliament. And they want to force Parliament to pass the estimates as they have brought it. And if you don't do it, they go and tell the President. Then the President summons the budget committee and tells them, this is my budget. But the Constitution says the National Assembly should review and submit it to the Assembly. It is if there are things that needs to be changed, then the Assembly will discuss it with the budget committee. Then at the floor of the House, they can agree that this is the budget we are going to pass. This has been a bad practice in our country. But nominee, are you willing to change so that Parliament can have its leeway, its freedom to discuss the budget and pass it within the Assembly?
Yes, majority.
Chair, with your indulgence, maybe just to put in better context what the Honorable Junet is saying, CS nominee. Parliament indeed considers what Junet is saying in line with the Constitution through the BPS. But the main challenge has been deviation from what is passed on as a budget policy statement, because it also includes estimates and ceilings. When you table your annual estimates, it is completely different from what was passed as a budget policy statement. So maybe just to paraphrase what Junet is asking, are you going to commit that what then is agreed on as a budget policy statement, because that is what you commit to and that is what the House passes, that then you will ensure that your annual estimates are in line with that budget policy statement? And it goes along with CS nominee into ensuring that you stick to what you intend to do. Because again, the other big problem we've had is abuse of Article 223 of the Constitution. And I have engaged you in another fora, and you know, where the current National Treasury CS has committed close to 200 billion shillings over and above what has been approved by Parliament without approval of Parliament. Therefore, maybe I should also add that as a question. Are you also committing that in case you are approved, we shall see to an end to the abuse of Article 223? Because it is reserved for things that are of emergency in nature. not to pay for land, like the Ruaraka land scandal. Maybe for information, the Ruaraka land scandal emanated from Article 223. It's something that was done especially around this time when there are no committees of parliament yet set up, just before an election or immediately after an election. Are we going to see an end to that abuse of Article 223?
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, honorable members, and thank you very much, Mheshimiwa Junet. Let me say this. History is very, very important because we are told that if you forget your history, you'll be condemned to repeat it. And I'm guided about what has happened in the past and how we can actually have a good start in terms of clarity of issues and also clarity of regulations that are set. I do believe, and I come from that private sector background and that thinking that once the government sets the right guideline, it gives the private sector periods of policy clarity, and that is what you are really asking for, because once the budget is done in the wrong way, then it affects also the projections by the private sector. But I can see, and you know that, we had sleepless nights in our technical committee when we realized the whole of 200 billion, which actually cannot be justified. The whole thing is that it is history that is going to teach us a lesson. We have a government led by His Excellency President William Ruto, which is actually saying, look, we have to follow the law. We have to follow the guidelines that we create. And we have to make sure that at the end of the period, we are evaluated on the basis of that. And I think those are the issues that I will follow with strictness, Mheshimiwa Junet and Mheshimiwa Ishongwa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We shall end here. Mukami, you've missed the boat today. You'll have the first bite in the next, unfortunately. But you had some interventions. Professor, I give you 3 minutes to tell us your final wish to this committee and expectation.
Thank you very much. I would have said that I work with rational expectations. So my first wish was that I do hope that I've made some commitments and even some content that allows you to actually consider my nomination positively. But more importantly, we learn from the past. And we learn from the past, that is adaptive learning. We learn from the past so that it guides us in the future. When you have been beaten in the past, you have to make sure that you correct the situation in the future. I do believe collectively, together with the National Treasury and Economic Planning, and the parliamentary, because essentially we'll be consulting now and then, we can make a difference in terms of where we are going, and of course, make sure that we rectify or live down that bad history. And I do believe that we are going to make a difference. So my prayer is that once I'm nominated, once I'm ratified as or approved by this committee, I'll make sure that I use all avenues, all my strength, and I've been there in terms of all my intellectual might, and all consultations necessary so that we all come up with the appropriate rules, appropriate solutions, and appropriate outcomes. I do believe in consultation. I don't think there is any one person who has the monopoly of knowledge. What we do have is consultation that improves the whole spectrum of the issues that we want to cover, our development agenda, and then that will make a difference. Thank you very much for giving me a chance. Thank you very much for listening to me. And thank you very much for, I hope I did answer all your questions, and where I failed, I'm sure we'll meet in some other avenues, and I will make sure that I clarify some of the issues that I had. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Very much, Professor. As we release you, you'll liaise with our secretariat. There are 2-3 documents they will require from you to make our record complete. You may take your leave and have a good afternoon. Honorable members, we will
Thank you,
now...
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As the nominee leaves, it is now 1:20. Break for lunch for 1 hour. We resume at 2:20. 2:20.